So for today, if you go into session 6, oh, wait a second, there's something else I think I want to do first. Yeah. If you can go back to session 5, inside that folder there is a file called Choke and Spread. If you can open that up. So again, in session 5, week 5, called Choke and Spread, if you can just open this guy up. And if you double click on the hand, so this is the beginning of a composite. If you can see, we're going to get into, when we get into compositing, we're going to work with this file a little bit more, but I just wanted to show you basically a way. We've already sort of gotten a little bit into this right now, so I just want to show you something about dealing with the edges once you've actually made this mask. If you zoom in really close, I'm going to come into this girl's shoulder, so come in really tight. Again, I'm just holding down the space bar and the command key to come in, and you can actually, if you zoom in really tight, you can see it pretty much all the way around her. There's spill that's in her hair. That's not what I'm really looking at. What I'm really looking at is this green line that runs right around her body. And the reason that you get this green line, the reason that when I did the knockout here, it doesn't become part of this image, it has to do with how digital files are actually processed. So if you hold down your shift key and you click on the mask, it'll actually get rid of the mask, and you can sort of see what's going on in here. You can spot the problem. What happens is that in digital photography, because of the way digital sensors work, the images themselves come out relatively soft, especially the edges. And so all behind the scenes, well, you see it actually if you open a file. If you, I think, double click on this smart object. I think it's still, it's got the raw data in it. Yeah, double click on the smart object right here. It'll bring you into camera raw. And if you go down, I'm in the basic panel is actually opened right now. I'm going to collapse that and go down to maybe optics. Nope. Detail. Sorry, it's going to be in detail. So open up the detail slider. In there, you will see that there is an amount of sharpening that's already been applied to this image. This is what they call pre-sharpening. So most of you guys know about sharpening. You know you need to sharpen your images before you print them. The reason you need to sharpen them before you print them is that when ink hits paper, it bleeds. And so you actually over-sharpen your image in Photoshop so that when you then print it out and you get the bleeding, the two cancel each other out and your image looks the way it's supposed to look. That's post-sharpening. Pre-sharpening is strictly applied, and every RAW program that processes RAW files has got some of this in it. You can go in and turn them all off, but it's not the smartest. Yes? Just double click on the smart object. And it's this sharpening that is causing that edge line that goes around it. So what's happening in here, you can actually cancel out of this to go back into Photoshop. So you can see it right here. What Photoshop does, and what all programs do that do this stuff, is that they go in and they find the edges of your image. So they run like high pass filter on it to find the edges of your image, and then they run contrast on those edges. And in doing contrast on those edges, if you really zoom into this thing tight, what you'll end up seeing is that there is a much darker area of green that's going right along this line. It's actually being boosted up. Sharpening, for lack of a better way of putting it, in Photoshop is always a contrast move. That's all it is. What this is doing, though, is it's restricting that contrast move to just the edges, and it makes the image appear to be sharper. Our problem with this, though, is that that green line, that when it got made, when they boosted the contrast on that line, it actually makes the green that's touching that jacket darker than the green background. And because it's darker than the green background, it does not get picked up in when we do zero selective color or color range or any of that, because it's a much, much, much darker shade of green. Does that make sense, everyone? So you don't really want to try to go after that darker shade of green inside of zero selective color. It's just much easier to deal with it after the fact, and that's what we're going to do right now. So if you've got the X across the layer mask, you can click on the X to undo it again. So this is what we are going to do. I need everybody, though, before I show you how to fix this, I want everybody to start just a brand new empty synthetic file for me. So to do that, come up to the file menu down to new, or just hit Command N. It will bring up in the new dialog box. I'm going to click on my drop down dimensions here to do this in inches instead of in pixels. And I'm going to do a width of 10 inches. Oop, not 19, but 10. And an 8 height. Again, it doesn't matter that much. Go ahead and do 300 pixels per inch though, and say OK to that. So we've got a brand new image that's actually going here, and then I am just going to hit the M key to get the marquee tool, the selection, the rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to click and drag out a line. Make sure that your feathering up at the top is set to 0. If it's set to anything else, you want it to be 0. And my style is just going to be normal. Then I want to fill this with black. Right now, my colors, I've got a green and a white as my foreground and background colors. If you hit the D key, not Command D, just the D key by itself, it'll default the foreground and background colors to black and white. Because black is now my foreground color, Option Delete will actually fill my selection with my foreground color, Command D to deselect. So if we move in really close to this, you can actually see I've got really sharp edges right here where my black actually meets the white. I want to put guidelines on this so I can actually see where I'm doing this work. So to get a guideline on this, I need my rulers to be showing. So up to the View menu, down to Extra, down to Show, and then over down to rulers right down here at the bottom, or almost at the bottom. Just rulers, just throw a check mark next to it. You'll get a little set of rulers that fly out. You can then click right on the ruler. I'm going to click on the one that's on the top and drag, and it'll pull down a guideline, and you can bring it down and let it rest right on the very top of where the black is meeting the white. And then I'm going to do the same thing coming in from the left side, just so that I can actually mark, so that I know going forward where those edges originally were. Does that make sense, everyone? Yes? Yep, so up at the View menu, down to Rulers, and then you'll have them. Okay. So then I'm going to blur this. So if we take a look right now, if you zoom in right now, and you can do this just before we blur it, take a look at your info palette. You can see if you're hovering in the black area right here, you get nothing but zeros. As you go across that transition line, you go from zeros to 255s like almost immediately. There's a small little jump in there. There's a couple of little tones of gray in there, but not really much. And the little bit of gray that's in there is only for the anti-aliasing part of it all. But basically, I'm going from black to white. Pretty much solid. So I'm going to blur this image right now. So come up to the Filter menu, down to Blur, down to Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to throw in, let me just check this out really quick. Throw in like a 7 pixel blur on this and say OK to that. And then if we zoom in and take a look at this, now what you can see has happened is that I'm going to start in the middle. Again, I'm black here in the very center part of this, but now as I go through this, I have got a lot of shades of gray before I ultimately get to white. So has everybody got the shades of gray in there? So again, remember what Levels does. Levels can take tones and remap them, and that's what I'm going to do. Hit Command L to bring up your Levels dialog box. And now if I'm going to grab the white point slider, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start dragging the white point towards the middle. And what I'm saying is that I want these middle tones of gray to be white. And look what happens to this shape. So I'm going to grab the white point slider and start to drag it. And you can see, because I'm saying I want those tones to be white, in effect, you have done what they call choked this image. You have brought this in now. Look at your guidelines. This is no longer on the guidelines. This has now been pushed inside. That's called a choke. You're choking this down. If you take your white point slider and take it all the way back again to the left and now grab your black point and drag it towards the center, you will see that that black starts to grow. It's now larger than those original lines. This is called a spread. So basically what we're doing is that we're shrinking something or expanding it based on two steps. The first step is that we introduce shades of gray so that we have something to change. And the second step is we run levels on it to either push those midtones to white or to black. Make sense? You can also do both. And I'm going to drag it all the way back. If you grab your black point slider and drag it part of the way towards the center and then grab your white and pull it down to part of the center as well, you can see as we go back iterations back and forth, we can sharpen that line back up. That's what we did when we were just looking at the masks first today. It's how we removed some of the softening that had happened on those layer masks. So this, we can actually sharpen it back up again. Is this making sense, everybody, how this process works? All right. So then this is how, you can close that up now. This is how we're going to actually choke and spread this layer mask and how we're going to deal with this edge. However, before you do a choke or a spread, you want to do a history snapshot. So what I'm going to do is go over to my history palette and I'm going to click on the little camera down at the bottom. You should get a dialog box that opens up that's saying, what do you want to call this thing? And we are going to call it pre-choke. Did everybody get that little dialog box that opened up and were able to name this? So if you take a look up at your top of your history palette right now, you'll see that there's a thing that was called choke and spread. That's what the image looked like when we opened it. Then there's another layer in here that's just called pre-choke. That's all we've done. It's another history state. So basically what it is it's a snapshot of what this image looks like right now in history. And this is what it looks like. So then I'm going to go ahead and choke this thing. So make sure that you have the layer mask is selected. We are then going to do the same steps we just did. Up to the filter menu, down to blur, and down to Gaussian blur. We're going to actually blur this thing and make it worse. Now, depending on the resolution of your image, these numbers change. So there is no fixed hard rule that you do 7 pixels here. 7 pixels, I can tell you right now, is too much. So I'm going to drag this down to 1 pixel and just see what it looks like. There's not much change in there. I'm going to drag it up to 2 pixels. There's a little bit of change in there. I'm going to look at 3 pixels and see what I think. 3 pixels I think is a little bit too much. So I'm going to try and do this with 2 pixels. The thing to remember about this though is that if this doesn't work, you just go back in history and pick another number. You make it larger or smaller or whatever. Does that make sense? Yes. I'm just looking for, yeah, I'm trying to, what I'm really looking for, to be honest with you, I'm going to hit cancel out of here. Really, don't do this, but I'll show you. If you actually hold down the Option key and look at the edge, what I'm really looking for is how many tones of gray am I really putting in here? Because that's what this is really all about. So I'll do it blind here, but I'll come up and do the same blur again. And you can see it's adding those tones in the middle, right? That's what I'm looking for. In this case, looking at it this way, I know that I've got more than enough tones in here right now, so I wouldn't go to the 3. The larger you get, the more extreme. Things start to get rounded off. The other shit starts to happen, so you don't want to push this any harder than you absolutely need to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is actually a 7. This is not a 2. So let me go back to the 2. Yeah, we'll see what 2 does. It might actually take a 3. Again, it's just how many tones am I really getting in here. So if I go to a 3, I'm going to try it at a 2. And again, if it doesn't work, we'll just do it again. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to the 2. It's actually made the problem worse. Now I need to do levels. Command L. It'll bring up the levels dialog box. Right now, I am on the wrong thing. I've actually got the brackets are around my image, and that's not where I want them. So I'm going to hit cancel. And then make sure that you've got the brackets around the mask, because we're going to, again, we are running levels on the shades of gray that are in the mask. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And then I can never remember which one it is. I mean, if I look at this, I can figure it out. But I'm going to just grab the white point guy and start to pull it back. And you can see it's actually making the whole edge worse. It's actually, this is a spread. It's not a choke. So then I'm going to go in the other direction. I'm going to grab the black point slider and start to drag it towards the middle. And look what happens to that line. It goes away. This is a choke. I've now choked the mask in. The green's still there. The mask is controlling what I see, but now I've gotten rid of that line. If for some reason this line seems too soft, that's where you would grab the white point slider and start to pull it in to sharpen up that edge. But right now, this is a twofer. It's not only getting rid of the sharp, that green line on there, but it's also keeping this edge a little bit on the soft side, just like you have to soften selections when you use the pen tool. Does this make sense what's going on here? So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And before you do anything else, this is critical. You need to make another history snapshot. So click on this, again, the little camera down at the bottom. In this snapshot, you're going to do post choke. And say okay to that. Then we can actually go back in time in our history to when this image just opened up. I'm going to click on the opened up part and you'll see I get this whole mask, the whole line actually comes back on it again. However, I've got history states now that sit right here. One of what this image looked like pre-choked, another what it looked like post-choke without that part. You can paint with history. So to do that, you look at your tool palette on the side. It's the tool that's actually right below the clone stamp tool. It looks like a paintbrush with an arrow going counterclockwise. If you click on that and hold down your cursor, you'll actually get a flyout menu. You get two brushes in this icon. One is the history brush, the other is the art history brush. You want to make sure you're only using the history brush tool. Then in terms of what we paint, that's controlled by the little icon in your history palette, the little icon that sits to the left. You can see that right now the state chokeandspread.psd, which is what my image was, it's the name of the image, it's what it was when it first got opened up. Then underneath it I got pre-choke and underneath it I got post-choke. You can actually select these history states, but you do not want to do that because it's an all or nothing thing. You do not want to click on these states. You simply want to put the icon on the state that you actually want to paint with. So in my case, I want to get rid of these things, so I'm going to do a post-choke in this. So I'm going to click on the little icon space to the left. Do not pick post-choke. If you select the history state, it'll do everything, and you will see, well here, you can actually see it. I'm going to zoom back out and just click on the whole post-choke state, and you'll see it fucks up the hair, it gets rid of the line, but it destroys the hair. That's not the thing that I want to actually do. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that part. You'll see it comes off of that. Instead, what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to go back into history to when this just opened. So this is what my image looks like completely. I'm going to pick that history brush, but then I'm going to click on the icon space just to the left of the history state where it says post-choke. Then your brush works just like any other brush does. If you click on your drop-down menu, I'm going to go ahead and make this medium hard brush. That's fine. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. You can use a relatively large brush. You just want to avoid her hair. I don't want to choke any about of her hair, but if I zoom in here, I can actually start to choke all of this part. Make sure again that you're on your layer mask, because where you do your history matters. And again, we're affecting the layer mask. And then simply click and actually paint down and get rid of all the, you're just going to choke the entire layer. Does that make sense? Did that work for everyone? Okay, stop at this point because that takes a long time to do. The green is supposed to be gone. You don't want to do the hair. That's spill.
I fixed it, but it's still like a little...
Make your brush a little bit bigger. And that part's right, that part's right. Click on your drop-down menu here. Let me just see what it's like. Yeah, that's good right there. Click to get rid of that, and then just drag down, big line on there. That's getting rid of the green, don't you think?
Oh, I'm like, oh, I was busy.
If you still see green, it means you didn't do your choke good enough, and then you would go back in history and just do the whole process over again and probably do a bigger blur, a 3-pixel blur. However, this is going to take forever to do this part, right? So check this out. If you put your, we're going to go back to the choke and spread version at the very beginning. So this is up at the very top. So now everything here has actually been, is brought back. I am going to click on the post-choke state. So I'm simply going to click on it, and you'll see it removes everything. It removes all the stuff around here, but it also removes all it chokes her hair, which I don't want to actually choke. So now I'm going to put my history brush icon next to the pre-choke, and now my history brush will paint what the image looked like before I choked it. So then I'm simply going to paint over her hair to bring back all the fine little feathery stuff. I bring back the spill. I'm going to have to fix the spill, but at least I've got real hair that I lost before. You'll also notice this is just another place to go and check out really quickly. If you look down at her shoes, a lot of times what a choke will do is it will actually eat into the bottom of shoes. So I'm going to, again, use my history brush with a pre-choke set, and I'm going to paint on the bottom. You can see, actually, the bottom of her shoe didn't pick up anything, and I brought back just spill on the side. So I'm going to Command-Z to undo that. But if you paint along the bottom of her shoe, I don't get anything on that side. I'm going to look at the other side. If you paint on the other side, you pick up a little bit of the other shoe that's on other part of the shoe to sort of bring that part back. Does this make sense? Pre-choking, post-choking, and history states? Game changer. Yes?
I was just going to say, so why can't you just do the process for spilling and then like select the black clothing and then unspill the green from the...
So that's not spill in the beginning. That's actually background.
It's like part of the background.
Oh, it is part of the background. So there's no removing it. There's no changing the spill part of it. But again, if you wanted to then ultimately fix the spill that's in her hair, which we actually would want to do, again, this is a smart object. I don't want to change that, so I'm going to add an empty layer on top of it, change the empty layer's blending mode to color, hit the B key to get a brush, make sure it's a normal brush. I'm going to make sure it's a soft brush. Mine is 100% opacity, 100% flow. Hold down the Option key to sample a color of her hair. I'm going to go for something a little bit darker, and then simply remove the spill. And again, you'll notice that the color spill removal that I'm doing is now coloring all of the leaves in the background, because this is what my layer looks like. And all of that, look at that. It's put a whole halo around her. It's made all the leaves behind her that same color. So to fix that, I need to clip this spill removal layer to the image itself so that the layer mask that's controlling what I see also controls where the spill is. So hover your cursor between the two layers, hold down the Option key, and click. And now it's only impacting the hair and not the leaves that are actually behind it. We good? All right, you can close this guy up. You don't need to save that. Finally, we get to week number 6. So if you go into session number 6, into your files, we're going to start with, there's a file in here called clonehealing1.psd. If you could open that up for me really quickly, that would be great. Double click on the hand to get it as big as it will get, and then you'll notice that your layer number 2 is highlighted. Go ahead and make sure that number 1 is highlighted. So we're going to deal with, I think I started a video, let me make sure, yeah. We are going to deal with, we're getting into retouching today, and we're going to get into it in a big way. How many people are in this class because you want to know how to really retouch skin well? Yeah, there's a lot of you. All right, so I'm going to teach you how to do it. You're going to, in some ways, regret that I'm teaching you this. I'm just going to throw that out right now. There are different levels of retouching that we deal with. So I'm going to throw out a hypothetical to you guys. You've got a really good friend who comes to you and says, I've got 10 fashion pictures, all full length, and I need you to retouch them, just clean them up a little bit, make the skin look pretty, that kind of stuff, whatever, and I got $100. Would you take that? Why not? Fuck, yes, you're taking, of course you're taking it. I'm going to have to spank every one of you. What if you could do it in 5 minutes? Wouldn't you take $100 for 5 minutes worth of work? I would.
If it takes 5 minutes,
Okay. Let's be really pessimistic about it. Let's say it takes 2 minute image, so 20 minutes. $100 for 20 minutes worth of work? Absolutely, I'll do that in a heartbeat. But again, you get to pick it, right? So then you say to yourself, I'm grabbing the healing brush tool, I'm going there and smacking the shit out of that face. I don't care if that skin looks like a doll. It doesn't make any difference to me. Here's your image, give me my money. That's one approach, right? Okay, then the same day you get a phone call from L'Oreal and they say, we've got a picture of Jennifer Hudson. She's going to be our new spokesperson for this. We need you to retouch this. You've got a month to do it and we'll pay you $20,000. Would you take that? Of course you would, right? But you're not going to go in there with the healing brush tool and spend 5 minutes and smack the shit out of Jennifer Hudson's beautiful skin and then say, give me my money, because they're not going to give you any money, right? So the thing the takeaway from this is that you really need to match the effort and the energy and the time that you put into this based on what the outcome really asks for, what it really needs. A full-length fashion image, it doesn't need the same thing that a beauty shot that would be for L'Oreal Cosmetics would really take. They're two different animals, and you approach them two completely different ways. What I'm going to show you today is the Jennifer Hudson retouch. It's going to be the $20,000. It takes forever to do it. It's a pain in the ass. Some people find real pleasure in doing this. I'm not one of those people. But so at any rate, that's where we're going to go. But first off, we need to get through the retouching tools. And the basic ones that we really deal with for the most part are the healing stamp tool and the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool. Those are the two that most of you guys use. There are variations on those. There's the patch tool. Those will come into play in some of these, whatever. But we really need to explore those tools. And I'm sure is there anybody in this room who has not used those two tools? Okay. I mean, it's like Photoshop 101, right? It's the first thing everybody starts to do. So can you tell me what's the difference between them? Yeah. Nobody knows. But the healing brush and the clone stamp tool.
The healing brush, does it like fixes from around to the
Instead of like suffering through this right now, I'm going to show you what the difference is, and because it matters. You need to use the right tool for the right job. And so this part really matters. So we're going to go into it, and from this class onward, you're going to know what the difference in the tools are and which one you should use for which thing. Make sense? All right, so we're going to start. We're going to actually start with the clone stamp tool. It's the S key on your keyboard, or if you take a look at your tool palette on the side, it's the one in the middle that looks like a stamp. If you click on the flyout menu, you'll see there's two options in there. There's the clone stamp tool and the pattern stamp tool. You want to make sure that you get the clone stamp tool is the one you want to use. Again, the minute this happens, your eyeballs need to go up to the options menu to actually take a look up here and see what the settings are. We're going to start with the drop-down menu for brush size right here. And if you click on that drop-down menu, the size I control the size using the bracket keys, so I don't bother with size in here, but I know some of you do, and you can still do that. However, the default for this tool is a 50% hardness. That doesn't mean that we can't change that, but it just means that that's where we're going to start here. That will be the default part. So if you've got your set up to 50% hardness, you're good to go. Again, to get the flyout menu to go away, click near the word that says Adobe, and you won't make any marks on your image or do anything, but you will get rid of that flyout menu. You need to make sure that your blending mode is set to normal, 100% opacity, 100% flow. You will also notice that right next to those two things, there is it's supposed to look like a brush or a pencil with a little circle. If you click on that, what it actually does is, and now if you have a tablet, now would be a very good time to bring your tablet out, because most of the work that we do here is going to be on a tablet, so now would be the time. When I told you you can't retouch well without a tablet, not the part that we're doing right now, but the high-end skin retouching that we're going to get to right after this demands a tablet. You won't be able to do it without one. You would never want to do it with a trackpad or a mouse. So at any rate, this little icon that sits to the right of this allows you, if you click on it, then what that will do is it will use your pen pressure on your tablet to control opacity. Now, when you get really advanced at this, that can be a beautiful thing to do, but I'm going to strongly suggest that you do not do that now, because what will happen is you will forget that you have enabled this, and then as you go on down the line, your tools will not work the way you think they should, because you've set up these weird tablet pressure controls on this. So I'm going to ask you not to do that on this one, and the same thing holds true, although it's a different thing. But if you look just to the right of flow, there's a thing that's supposed to look like an airbrush. And what that will do is it will actually use, what'll end up happening is that right now if you use flow or you drop your flow down, whatever it is, if you just lay your cursor down, either using your tablet or your mouse or anything like that, flow will not continue to spit out ink unless your cursor is actually moving. So even if you jiggle it just a little bit, it'll continue to spray ink out, sort of like a spray can does. However, if you enable that airbrush little icon, the one that my cursor's on right now, you don't have to move your brush at all. Just having your brush, your mouse down, or your stylus in contact with your tablet will continue to spray ink out. It works just like a true airbrush works. My suggestion is that at the beginning here, do not enable either one of those. Continuing to go on our way over here, there is a check mark for aligned. By default, that should be on. And then finally, there's a drop-down menu that allows you to actually say what you want to sample. In our case, we can do color layer, or we can do current layer or current and below. It doesn't matter which one we're doing here, because we're only going to be working on this one layer. We'll look at reasons to do other things with that later on. So I'm going to use the bracket keys to actually make my cursor a little bit larger, and I'm going to actually start on the gradient side. So I'm going to start in the upper right hand corner. The way both of these tools work is that you establish a source point first and a target second. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually put some of this gradient on the solid gray layer. So I select the source first, and you do that by, I'm hovering in this top right-hand corner, holding down the Option key and clicking once, and it will actually then, this is now set as the source. If I now bring my cursor over onto the other side, you will actually see things change on this other side. Hang on one second, I gotta check something on mine that you guys won't have to check right now first. So hang on one sec. Okay, so as you hover then over the gray, you will actually see you get a preview. Does everybody have a preview? Is it like a dark circle onto the gray part? That's fine. Simply click and drag down, and you'll notice as you're dragging down that there's a little cross that appears over in the gradient part. This is showing where the source is actually evolving to, and as you go all the way down, it then replaces the gray area with the gradient. Did that happen for everyone?
No, but I was gonna say mine is not upward. I clicked it and there's no circle.
All right, so hit the S key. You got the clone stamp tool. Come over here. Make you're not on the bottom layer. That's why you're getting nothing. Now come up here. Make your brush much bigger. Keep going, keep going. Perfect, right there, good. Hold down the Option key and click once in here and let go. and then come over here, and you'll see it. Come back here. We need to read that warning when it comes up. So I'll hold down the Option key, click once, come over here now, and you're good to go. All right, if we come back, don't come at the very top. Don't start at the very top here. I want you to start in the very middle. And I want you to just, again, I'm going just another column to the left. Click and drag down again. And you'll notice that everything stays related to everything else. So this understood when I did it at the very top that I was coming down, but now it understands that no matter where I start, if I start down here at the very bottom, if I click and come down at the very bottom, look where my little cross is. It knows that I am, so I'm keeping the very same aspect to it. If I start at the very top up in here, it knows to come up to the very top. So it keeps these things aligned. They are perfectly aligned together. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on?
Mine is not.
Only because you're going up above it.
About what?
So you started when you clicked up here, you started down here. Come over here in this part and just click and drag straight down. It'll keep the same thing. Yeah, so it's still aligned.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. So I need everybody to then in history go back up to the very top where you actually just clicked on open. I want to undo that. We're going to go back to where we were in the very beginning. Again, it selects that layer number 2, which is invisible. You want to make sure that you're clicking on the background layer. And now I'm going to uncheck that aligned part. So I'm going to uncheck the little check mark by the word that says aligned up in my options palette. I'm going to reset my sample again. I'm going to hover up in the upper right-hand corner, hold down the Option key. I'm on the gradient side. Hold down the Option key and click. That sets it as a point. I'm going to come over now and click and drop down, and the same thing is going to happen that happened before. However, now I'm going to start in the middle, and what you will see is very different. I'm going to start in the middle and click and drag down. And what you'll see now is that no matter where I go, it starts at the original point again. It doesn't keep the alignment between these two. It always goes back and it defaults up. If I even come up here at the top, it doesn't matter where I go. It's always going to default back up to that top original source point. This can be a real aid to us when we're doing certain things. Specifically, if you can find a piece of good texture somewhere, you can use this setup to then paint that texture anywhere in your image you want to go, and you don't have to keep referencing it. You don't have to keep going back to it over and over and over again. So it's a good trick to actually have in your arsenal. So I'm going to go back up to the top of my history and click open again to get rid of it, to go back to the way it looks. Make sure that you click the background layer because it always selects that top layer. I am going to enable aligned again. And this time now I'm going to go to the healing brush tool. But let me explain what happened with the clone stamp tool. So the clone stamp tool is a direct replacement. What's happening here, actually, I want to do this. This will be a good one. Do it this way. Stay with your clone stamp tool. So again, hit the S key. I want you to make the clone stamp tool completely soft, a completely soft brush. And then again, go ahead and check aligned again. And we're going to sample that top corner again. So I'm going to hold this top corner, Option, click, come over here, and simply click and drag down. And you can see that this is now a one-to-one replacement in the image. Actually, here, we're going to do one more. We're going to do one more. I need you to change your brush now from 100% soft, from 0 hardness to 100% hardness. And then we're just going to do another line that comes down sort of to the left of all of this. So you can see that on the hard brush, whatever here, this is 100% replacement. It is taking the source and replacing the target 100%, and it does it all the way out to the edges. I've got these perfectly sharp hard edges here. It is a direct replacement one-to-one. But look at what happened with the soft brush. On the soft brush, in the center areas right here, it is a complete replacement. But on the edges, as it starts to fade out, what's happening is that I'm allowing old content to come through that edge. This is now a mixture of new content and old content. Does that make sense to everyone? You can see it a little bit easier going in the other direction. So go back up and hit open again in your history palette. Make sure that you select your background again. We're now going to sample, instead we're going to set the source on the gray part. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, click to set my source in the upper left-hand corner, come over and paint on the gradient. And you can see that when you do a hard brush like that, it's fine. It replaces it 100%. There's no mix of gradient and gray here. But if I take my brush and make it completely soft, and then do the next one over and click and drop down, you can now see this area right in here. This edge right here is a mixture of that old black and the new gray. This is mixing now. Yes? You're right. Okay, so come up here. We're going to sample. So Command click to sample. You're in Healing Brush tool. You need to hit the clone stamp tool, S key. That's okay. And resample again. And perfect. So this is the problem in using this tool, and the Healing Brush tool is no different. So what's happening here, if you think of this as skin, the black represents the original texture that you're trying to fix. The gray represents the new texture that you're bringing in to fix it. Unfortunately, you've got this edge where you are mixing old texture with new texture. That's how you fuck up your image. That's how you end up with, if you go into any Jewel, Osco, Sephora, it doesn't matter where you go, and you look at the little, the placard, the point of purchase cards for every makeup line in the world, and that shit looks just plastic and horrible. Do you want that skin? No, I run as fast as you can, right? That's just not real skin. That's like fake cyborg. That's like science fiction skin shit. I don't want that, and you shouldn't either. And I can promise you, the $20,000 retouch that they're spending on it, they're not going to want that either. Your friend, on the other hand, who's got the 10 fashion images of full length, whatever, may love that. But at any rate, so that's the holy grail in all of this. When we talk about retouching, and again, part of the reason I focus on skin is that it's one of the most difficult things to do, and pretty much any problem that you're going to run into retouching anything else, you run into it in retouching. So this is the issue, and the reason that using these tools is not your best move in doing any of this kind of retouching. Okay, back up to the top, click open again to get rid of all of that part. Make sure that you've selected the background on the bottom part right now. So now we're going to go to the Healing Brush tool. The shortcut for that is the J key. If you then click and come onto the drop-down menu here, you'll see that there's more tools than that in this. There's three that we really care about. There is the Spot Healing Brush, there's the Healing Brush tool, and the Patch tool. We're going to look at all of them in just a second. The Spot Healing Brush tool, if you pick this one and you come over, again, I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. If you come over, first off, you need to look up at the very top. Again, we're going to click on the drop-down menu. Also, the hardness for the Healing Brush tool is also 50%. However, there's other things that you've got going on in this options menu up at the top. The first is you want your blending mode to be normal, but the second is that how you actually treat texture. This tool was pretty shitty when they first introduced it, and then they came up with Content Aware. And when they rolled Content Aware into this tool, it actually became a much more effective tool. I can't say it's the best one in all occasions, but it's certainly a whole lot better than it ever was before. So we're not going to start with this tool, though. We're actually going to start with the one that's underneath it. So if you click on the icon and come down to just the regular Healing Brush tool, this was the original tool, and this is the one that actually works more like the clone stamp tool in that go back to the Spot Healing Brush tool and then try to set a sample origin point. So I'm going to be up at the top, I'm going to hold down the Option key and click, and you'll get this warning message that comes up, and it says that the Spot Healing Brush tool automatically samples sources for you. You can't do this. So I'm going to say, okay, fine, I remember now, hit cancel, and then change it to the normal Healing Brush tool, which is the second option down. and now come over to, and you can actually set your sample point. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, click on this to set my sample point, and then I'm going to come over, and it looks like things are going to happen just like they did before. But I want you to then click and drag all the way down and let go. And we have nothing. Why? It's the difference in how these tools work. So the healing brush tool does not do a direct clone replacement. That's what the clone stamp tool does. Pixel for pixel, clone stamp, pixel for pixel. If you clone it, it replaces the target with the source, no bones about it. If you use the healing brush tool, what it does is this. It's a two-step process. The first step is that it replaces the texture of the target with the texture of the source. So if you look at the gradient right here, it's taking the texture from the gradient and then it's actually changing the texture on the gray side to replace it with the texture of the gradient. Then the second step is it looks at the color and the tone that surrounds that healing, and it tries to blend the color and tone of the new texture with the area that is around it. So in my case, there is no texture in this image. This is a synthetic file. There is no texture in it. So when I did the healing brush tool and I pushed down, the texture is the same. There was no shift in this. So you see no change in it. However, the color, the tone was different, but the second step of the healing brush process is that it looks at the gray that's surrounding this and it says, okay, we need to make all of that gradient this gray. Does that make sense? So again, I'm doing this stroke down, I'm pulling down like this. The texture is the same, there is no change. But now what it's looking at, if we go back, this is just an illustration. Don't do this, but this is just an illustration. If we do this with this clone stamp tool, what it's doing is it's replacing the texture, but then it says, but okay, but this entire thing is surrounded by gray, so we need to make this whole thing gray. So you get texture that has been replaced, but then tonally and color-wise, it tries to blend in the new texture so that it matches the tone and the color of the surrounding area. Are we sort of okay on that? We're going to see this in real time in just a minute. However, there's a couple of other things I want to look at first before we do that. So come up, if you've done any of this work, click the open spot up there. We can actually change that part. I want to go ahead and turn on this circle layer that's at the very top and actually turn the circle on. Then we need to open a new window. There's a new window palette. So come up to your window menu and come down to clone source. And you will actually see this flyout menu. You can have multiple cloning sources, and this applies to Healing Brush tool as well. You can have multiple cloning sources here. You'll see that at the very top where it says clone source, I can have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I am actually going to go back to my original background. I'm going to turn off the top. I'm going to go back to my original background, and I'm going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click just on the top of my gradient to set a new clone source. Then I'm going to go back up to my layer number 2, and I'm going to turn it on, and then I'm just going to come over into my image, and I'm going to click and actually do this. And you can see that it actually does the cloning. It remembers where the source was. The source was in this image in my background right here. It remembers where that is. It also has labeled it as this number 1 source point right up in here. If you bring up a brand new file, Command N, just a regular raw file, just the same 8x10 we did before, and click OK onto that, you can actually continue to clone source in this. You can clone from image to image. It does not have to be in the same image. And this will always be remembered up here in this clone source. If, on the other hand, I come down and I click on, I'm going to close that new image up. I don't need to save it. I'm going to go back in history here on this one to undo this clone. So Command Z, I can't do it there, so I'm going to go back in history right here. I'm going to click on my second clone source point right here. So I'm going to click on this guy. It's now the second one from the left. And I'm going to set a source point based on part of the arc. So if we look at this like it's a clock face, make sure that that layer 2 is selected. I'm going to do a source point right around 2 o'clock. I'm going to hover right over the center of that, hold down the Option key and click. And then I'm going to bring this over here and I'm going to click. What I was hoping to do was to be able to get this to actually fix the hole that's in the arc. But you can see my clone source is actually going the wrong direction. However, what you should also realize is that if you go back to your original source point, your source point number 1, this is actually the gradient. So these clone sources are remembered and they're sticky and they last like forever. You can close this thing down and open it back up and it will remember a clone source point that you did on an image from way back when. The image needs to be open for it to function, but nonetheless, it will function across images. Pretty wild, right? Gets better. I'm going to go back to open here to get rid of all of those parts to sort of start over again. I am going to go back to my clone second point right now, the one that actually had the arc in it. And you'll see that as you get close to something here that it begins to show the arc again. Actually, I take that back. Let's go back to the original black and white one. So I'm going to go back to my original black and white one. I am going to go back to my first clone source point again because that was the gradient. And as I hover over, it doesn't look like it's doing it correctly. So let me reset that point number 1. Option, click. As I hover over this part, you can actually see that I'm getting a preview of what's going to happen. And if I click and drag down, that happens. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. However, there's times where you need to be able to see your target. I can't see my target because it's being completely covered by that circle. I'm going to actually make my brush completely hard again because it's just a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. So now as I'm hovering over this area right here, I can't see what's underneath it. If there's something that I know I need to hit exactly where that point is underneath it, this preview hides it. So in your clone source window, you can uncheck the show overlay. And when you uncheck that and now hover over this, you can see exactly, there is no preview covering it, but if you click and drag down, it actually does what you expect it to do. Command Z to undo that. Sometimes you need to see both at the same time. You need to see part of your target and part of your source. To do that, you turn on Show Overlay and you drop the opacity down to 50%. And now what you will see, again, instead of having that completely black overlay, I've got a gray overlay. It's showing me half of my preview is my source, half of it is my target, and I can line stuff up perfectly. Make sense? Okay, I'm going to drag this all the way back open again, 100% open. I'm going to go ahead and leave Show Overlay on. I'm going to go back to my layer number 2. How do we get this then to complete the arc in here? So to do it, I am actually going to reset my source number 2. I'm going to hover right over the 2 o'clock, the 3 o'clock, whatever it is. I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to click to set that as my source point. However, now I'm going to change the angle of my source point to 180 degrees. So it's not the positioning ones up at the top. It's not offset or the width or the height part. It's this angle part right here. If you drag through that and put in 180, again, there's 360 degrees in a circle. 180 degrees would be the exact opposite for it. Go ahead and hit the Enter key to do that. And now look what happens. Your cloning has been flipped. And now you've actually got a better chance of being able to get it to line up with the arc that's missing. However, you'll notice if you try to do this, if you come in here and you actually try to figure out where it's supposed to line up, and then you click and you drag down, you might be close, but you might not be close. It might not happen. This is off. It's not quite there. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo it. The trick to getting this to fit is to make your brush much larger. If you continue to make your brush really large, Eventually, it will actually cover the area that you need to actually cover, and then you can just bring your cursor back and forth. Again, I need to go beyond my space here. Actually, I need to go beyond my space, and it's going to become the cursor again. So go to your pasteboard, hit the F key, and now you can actually get this guy to line up. And you simply need to go back and forth until it does line up. I can see right now that my source point is too low on this, so I'm going to set a new source point, getting more up to the 1 o'clock-ish kind of area. Hold down the Option key and click, and then bring this guy back down, and hopefully I'll have better luck. And you just sort of slowly work it in and hit, and you've completed the circle. So, not that I would tell you to do this normally, but if you've got a roommate that is really pissing you off, go into their Photoshop, go into their clone source, set the angle of their clone stamp tool to 180 degrees and close it, because nobody knows about this window at all. And all their cloning will be exactly upside down and backwards. And it'll drive them out of their minds. Yeah. In our case, we are not going to leave this at 0 at 180 degrees. Change it back to 0. Yes?
Mine I did it the opposite way. I did it on the other layer instead of doing it on this layer. Wait. Okay, never mind.
Yep.
I did it.
Okay, so perfect. You can hit the F key again to get to the black pasteboard, and the F key finally one more time to get back to the stoplights, and you can close this guy up. We do not need to save that. And you can also close up the clone source. We are going to start with your homework, so at least we're going to get a jump on that. So in your homework, if you actually click on your assignment folder, inside of there is a file called Skin as Retouch. If you can double click on that to open it up. This will be your homework. Did you find it?
I said it's not Jennifer.
I'm sorry?
No, I said it wasn't Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not Jennifer. Her name's Magdalena. Anyway. Okay, so hang on 1 second. Is this circle flat? Oh, come on, it's not that much of a trick question. Yes, it's flat, right? It has no dimension, doesn't have the illusion of dimension, right? What about this one? Does that have the illusion of dimension? Of course it does, right? So what's the difference in the two? It's the same tone, no highlight and shadow, right? So what gives things dimension? What gives texture dimension? It's highlights and shadows. So for all of those beauty shooters out there, something to keep in mind, all of you who actually set up your beautiful Rembrandt lighting, which is a cross lighting, to actually shoot your beauty, you end up with highlights and shadows. You couldn't do anything more to bring out the texture of skin. Not a good thing. If it's amazing skin, you don't need to worry about it. But if it's not amazing skin, this is a problem. You are actually deliberately bringing it out. That's why most beauty lighting situations, when you see that, are really flat lights that sit over the top of a camera. They'll have shadowing underneath. You can still have contouring and that sort of thing in there, but it's a flat light because they're trying to suppress the texture of skin. It's that simple. So when we retouch it, if we're going to do retouching well, we need to take this into consideration. What we need to do is figure out a way to actually eliminate the highlights and the shadows on the skin. That's how you get into high-end skin retouching, and that's what we're going to do right now. So just so that you know what the goal here is. So I don't want you to do this yet. I want you to watch how I'm going to go about doing this. I'm not going to save this. How do you guys dodge and burn in Photoshop? before we get to that part, whatever, I'm going to start doing this in the order that I would normally do this in. So this is, grab a piece of paper really quick. You all need to write this down. Did everybody get on the sign-in sheet, speaking of piece of paper? Yeah. All right. Yeah, either if you don't write it down, just put it in your phone. So it has to do with the layer order that we do retouching in. So what I'm referring to is the layer stack that's right over here. So the order that this happens in, and this does not change. So the first thing that you do is pixel retouching. What is that? Well, that's any clone stamp work that you're going to do, healing brush work that you're going to do. It's the what we're really talking about is changing pixels. In this assignment for this, you're going to actually fix the hole in the girl's hair. There's a big open space that's showing her forehead. You're going to close that up. But all of that is pixel work. It does not include liquefying. Liquefying happens much later in the game, but everything else is going to happen in that first layer. Pixel work is first. Tonal work is second. Tonal work is what I'm really here to show you how to do today. After tonal work, we go into color grading. Now, the color that we're starting with here should be very close to what you want in the beginning. And the reason that matters is that if you start to do a bunch of pixel work on this and then go back and change the original color, all of your pixel work is worthless because it will have been done in a different... So for instance, if I were to use this as my base, I'm going to do a bunch of retouching, use the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool, whatever, and then I go back in and I say, oh, you know, I really need to make that skin darker. All of that lighter pixel work is just going to show up and you're going to have to do it all over again. So tonal work sits on top of that because tonal work will actually work through the pixel work. That's a little bit confusing right now, but it'll make sense in just a minute. On top of that is what we call color grading. Color grading would be, do I want to change my image? Do I want to make it a black and white? Do I want to make it warmer or cooler or something for a specific reason? That would actually happen on top of that. Liquefying happens on top of that. Sharpening, output sharpening happens on top of that. That's pretty much always going to be the order. Now, there are times that we will go through stacks of this. You'll do pixel tonal grading, and then you'll actually merge again and start it all over again. You can do new pixel work, new grading work, new tonal work, this can expand, but that's basically the order that we're always going to be working in. So we're going to start with a pixel layer on this. To do this, hit Command J to actually make a copy. How many of you guys, when you do your clone stamp work, whatever, do it on a empty layer? You set an empty layer apart and then you start doing your cloning work on top of that. There's a problem with that, and the problem, I'm going to show you the problem right now. So get rid of this layer that we just jumped. I want you to just add a brand new blank layer onto this. And we're going to come up next to her eyeball. So I'm going to come up next to her eyeball right here. And I'm going to hit the clone stamp tool, the S key to actually get the clone stamp tool, make it smaller. I'm going to make sure normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and let's go ahead and make it a completely hard brush. And then I want you to actually, smaller brush. A little bit smaller. I am going to then sample her pupil. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, click on it to actually sample the pupil, and then I'm going to come over to the white of her eye and click and actually paint on that. Oh, I've got this set to only current layer, and I'm on my blank layer right here. So set your layer sample, up again, Options palette all the way to the right, to current and below, and then we'll do it again. Hover over the eyeball, over the pupil, hold down the Option key, click, and then come over and actually put in the eyeball. And this works exactly the way you think it should work. However, you've actually got blending modes for this as well. And if you change the blending mode of your brush, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo this. If you change the blending mode of your brush, of your clone stamp tool, from normal to lighten, then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to hover over the eyeball, the pupil. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to come over and paint. And you'll notice that it painted the eyeball again. However, the eyeball is not lighter than the white of her eye. the pupil is darker. So this blending mode has been ignored, because what the blending mode is saying is that I only want you to lighten things. I don't want you to darken things at all. I only want you to lighten them. Does that make sense? So the reason this is happening is that if you turn off your background layer right here, this is a transparent layer. What is lighter or darker than transparent? There's nothing. It's transparent. There is no lighter or darker. So blending modes can't exist in this scenario here, so they don't work for us here. That's a huge problem for us, because the retouching that we're trying to do is we're trying to be the least destructive that we can be and get away with it. And these blending modes can help us hugely. So instead of doing that, you can throw away that layer. Instead, now we're going to jump this layer. So Command J. Now I actually am going to do my retouching on a layer that really has tone to it. So again, I'm going to hover over this. Again, S key, I'm going to hover over the eyeball again, the dark pupil, hold down my Option key, click to actually do that. My blending mode is still to lighten, and now I'm going to click again on that area that's the white of the eye, and you can see the only thing it did was actually add the catch light in her eye, because the catch light is lighter than the eyeball, than the whites of her eye. But it didn't add any of the blackness there, because the black is darker than that white of her eye. Does that make sense, what's going on here? So even though it adds to your file size, you always want to be working on a copy of your pixel content so that you can leverage these blending modes here to make things, to restrict where they really change things. We good on that part? Okay, you can hit Command Z to undo that. We are going to start on this layer. I'm going to double click on it and call it Pixel Retouching. And then we're going to look down here on the lower part of her cheek. If you look on the lower right-hand side part of her cheek, you will see that there's been makeup applied to what I've called this a cigarette burn for years. That's just the devil in me speaking. I don't know where that really comes from, but nonetheless, this is not something that we can fix tonally. This is something that we are going to have to fix using the retouch tools. So when you look at this, what is the problem with this area?
There's no color.
Well, there is color. It's just different than the color that's surrounding it, right? So the color is a mistake to begin with. What else? The texture. So going back only 20 minutes ago when I said what is the difference between the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool, what did I say the difference was? What does the healing brush tool do? The first step is it changes the texture of the target with the texture of the source. What's the second step? It blends the surrounding color into the new texture. Isn't that exactly what Jared just said was the problem with this? So this is not a clone stamp fix. This is a healing brush fix. So we're going to do 3 of them really quickly just to show you what they are, and then we'll decide which ones we like the best. So the first one is, I am going to go to the clone stamp tool. We are actually going to pick the spot healing brush tool. Again, this is where Photoshop actually picks the source for us. We do not pick the source. I am going to go up and make sure that my hardness of my brush is set to 50%. We do need to have this blended in, or you will spot it. If you do 100%, you will see it from a mile away. So I'm going to go over this area right here, and here's the thing about these tools, all of these tools. With the clone stamp tool, if you make your tool really small, just watch what happens here. Watch my screen. You don't need to do this. I'm actually going to then just paint over this area. You'll see it gets really dark. But I did not paint over the entire mistake. And when that happened, it actually replaced the texture here where I brushed on it, but then it took the color of the fucked up area and brought that color into my new fix. And so it will not work. Does that make sense? So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. When you do the the healing brush tool, you need to cover the entire area in one stroke. You need to get it all, because otherwise what is left behind will get blended into your fix. So I'm covering this entire patch, and I'm going to let go. And I can still spot the lightness in this, but nonetheless, we are going to decide which we think is the best version of this. So I need you guys just to paint over that thing and get rid of the cigarette burn. Are we good? Come over to your history palette and click on this. We're going to do a snapshot. This first snapshot is spot healing. And say OK. Then I want you to go back one step in history to where you undo that spot healing brush tool. We've got a history state of it. We'll be able to see what it looks like later. We're going to go to the next tool down, the healing brush tool, where you get to pick the source. So I'm going to grab the healing brush tool. I'm going to make my brush smaller. And then I am looking at this. You clearly don't want to use the skin that's up on the upper part of her cheek, because that's just going to bring more trouble down into this area. You also don't want to go down in here where you're looking the area that's where all the fuzzy part of her cheek is, because that will bring all those fine little hairs into here. But also you need to think about focus on this. You cannot pick something that's way on the side of her face that's much deeper in my frame, which is out of focus because of depth of field. You can't use that to then fix an area that's in the front of her face that's in focus. So we've got to pick an area for our source that's roughly the same focus as this and that has the texture that we want. You can try it above. I worry about the area above here that it seems like there's a part of that pebbly skin that's actually getting into the part up here. I don't want that. The part down here below seems to work pretty good for me. Even though this is a little bit darker and a little greener, it doesn't matter because, again, the color is going to come from the surrounding area. I'm just looking for texture right now. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and sample down here below. And it's the same trick. You've got to cover the entire thing in one swoop, or it will bring in color from the bad area. So this is my second fix. I'm going to do a history snapshot of that and call it Healing Brush. And say OK. And then go back again, one step in history to bring back the cigarette burn. And the last one is the patch tool. So if you come to the dropout menu for the Healing Brush icon, down to the patch tool, it's the third one down. The patch tool works different than the other two tools. In the patch tool, what you do is you select the target first, and then you drag that selection to what you want to be the source. So it's the exact opposite. So we are going to select the entire cigarette burn. And again, you want to make sure you get it all. So be generous in your selection. You want to go outside the selection. You don't want to try to be right on this line. So I'm going to select this area. It works. It's basically what you've got going is the lasso tool right here. I'm going to select this area to make a complete selection of it. You will have the marching ants. But now if you put your cursor right in the middle of the selection, you'll get this icon. It's supposed to look like the patch, and it's got an arrow that points up and to the right. All it's telling you is that you need to drag this selection to the area that you want to use as the new texture. So again, I'm going to drag it right down here to the same area that I use for the healing brush. I'm simply going to click and drag down. You'll notice that the texture has changed, but the color has not. Again, this is the first step of two. When I let go, it will replace the texture and then it will blend the color. So I'm now going to let go and you'll see it just got lighter. Command D to deselect, and we're going to do a history snapshot of this and call it Patch Tool. And say OK to that. Then you can go up to your history palette and just look at the three different ones and see which one you like the best. And when I look at these, the spot healing brush is obvious. I can spot that a mile away. It brought in some of that pebbly skin because of the content aware. The healing brush tool actually looks pretty good to me. And the, the patch tool seems a little obvious on this one edge. So I'm going to go with the healing brush tool. That's how I would do it. Make sense? Okay. So that's the pixel content of it. You can leave this on here right now. Now we get to the tonal part of it, which is what this whole class is all about right now anyway. So how do you guys dodge and burn? That's the best line I've had all day, Evan. Thank you. Anybody in here use a soft light layer? All right, so that's how we're going to do this here because I want to be able to do this all on one layer. If you don't know what a soft light layer is, you're going to find out right now. So to make this, we're going to go through some steps. You can make this mechanically, but I'm going to show you a shortcut to make it faster. So we're going to add a blank layer on top of this. So come over, it's the little icon at the very bottom of your layers palette. It's the square with a little plus in the middle. But before you click on it, hold down the Option key. If you click on it, all you do is get a layer on the top. But if you hold down the Option key and you click, you'll actually get a setup dialog box that'll allow us to do all the other things that we want to do to this layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is name this layer Tonal Retouch Detail or Tonal Retouch Small. Either one, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do small. Tonal Retouch Small. Then in the Mode drop-down menu, click on this and go down to Soft Light. And then finally, when you do that, you'll get a little check mark or a space, that an addition that appears underneath it where you can check where it says Fill Soft Light Layer with Neutral Color, which is a 50% gray. You want to click on that and then simply hit OK. And what it'll do is it will actually give you a layer on here that's named Tonal Retouch Small. It's filled with 50% gray and the blending mode is set to soft light, but you don't see anything because in a soft light, in the contrast group right in here, the soft light, overlay, hard, all of those, anything that is in your image that is 50% gray, you do not see at all. Anything that's lighter in that image will make things lighter. Anything that's darker will make things darker. Overlay is just a stronger version of soft light. So if you're doing this work and you're frustrated that it's not happening strong enough for you, it would be interesting to see what you're trying to retouch. But nonetheless, overlay would be an option in here. But soft light is, gives you a little bit more breathing room when we're trying to build this. So I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to check it to make sure I'm going to go ahead and make it 100% hard so you can really see the edges of it. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and I'm simply going to click and drag a line down right now. And you can see that what happens in soft light is that it actually makes this image part darker. It respects some of the color, but not all of the color, but it makes the image darker. If you hit the X key to make white your foreground color and you do the same thing, it makes the image lighter. Again, you can see through the image. So this is basically the mechanism we use to make things, to do our dodging and burning, to make things lighter and darker. However, it isn't just making things lighter and darker. It's also adding the tone of the color that we're painting with to this image. And because I'm using black and I'm using white, what ends up happening is that it's going to make the image darker or lighter, but it's also going to desaturate this image because it's adding gray to the area that I'm working in. And you don't spot it in areas that are very subtle, but when you get into doing this pretty heavily, all of a sudden the area that you're working on that you're trying to make darker, it will be darker, but it will also have lost the skin color. It'll be gray. And the same thing will happen with white. So we can't use our black and white to be our dodging and burning colors. Instead, we have to make our own based on the skin color, which is what I'm going to do right now. If you've done this, go back to your new layer in history to get rid of those tones. So we're going to start with the light color or our dodging color. So I'm going to click on the foreground color picker. It opens up the color picker, and the first thing I'm going to do is just click on her skin. And I'm looking for, you want to, especially if she's got makeup on, you would want to avoid anywhere that had blush or lipstick or that kind of stuff. You don't need to worry about foundation so much, but you want to pick an area that's basically sort of middle skin tone here. You want to stay away from the highlights, you want to stay away from the shadows. We are going to build those ourselves. So I'm just going to pick an area right here on the side of her nose, and I'm just going to click on it. And all I really care about, if you take a look at the color picker, is the hue color. It's this 27 degrees. That's all I care about. Everybody else I'm going to set manually. So you should, if you clicked on that area, you should be close to a hue of 27 degrees. It doesn't have to be exact, but it should be close. If it's reading in the 30s or the teens, you're way off. We good on this part? However, now, again, I want a color that's very close to white, but that is not white. It needs to carry some of this color. So my first move is to actually click on the brightness radio button in all of this, and I can take those two little arrows and crank them all the way up, not all the way, but I'm going to come up to around 95% brightness. So this is a very bright color now of the exact skin tone that I picked up off of her, of the skin color, the hue that I picked up off of her. However, this is still far too saturated, so now I'm going to click on my saturation button, the radio button for saturation, and I'm going to drag it down, and I'm going to get down. Usually I work in the low teens. You don't want to go all the way down. If you go all the way down, you are back to having a gray. You've got no color in this, and that will cause your correction of your images to be desaturated, to be gray. So I'm going to leave it up around 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. You can see this is an extremely light flesh color we got going. Make sense? Click OK. That is going to be our dodging color. Now we're going to click the color picker, the background color, to make the color for my burning color. Now right off the bat, I can simply click on my foreground color. It will give me that same 27 hue degrees. That's all I really care about. I could have typed it in because I remember it. But now I need to click on my, I'm going to do brightness first. I'm going to grab my brightness and drag it down. And again, I'm going to come down somewhere in the teen area for that. However, you can see I've lost all sense of color in this. I don't have a dark skin tone in this, and that's because my saturation is way too light. Click on your saturation and bump your saturation up. Usually I work up in the midtones and now, or in the mid-range in here. And now you can see, if you look at it, you've got a very dark color of that skin. Did this work for everyone? And say okay. Say what? I'm in the mid, again, this is not an exact number. I'm in the mid-ranges. Mine's a 52. It's rough though, but at any rate. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. So now we need to actually move down to the pimple that is right on this girl's face. So I'm going to show you how to do this first. Do not do this yet. I'm going to show you how to do it, and then I'm going to let you all do this. So the trick here is, if I can make the head of the pimple darker and the area that's around the pimple lighter, I should be able to get rid of the pimple. I'm doing this tonally, so I'm not affecting any texture here at all. That skin is still going to be what that skin is. Clone stamp tool would replace the texture. Healing brush would replace the texture. Then I've got the edges of that are going to be new texture laying on top of old texture, and you might as well just say, I just fucked my image up. So this is how you do it. You need to actually make your brush completely soft. We are going to keep the blending mode at normal, but I am going to drop my opacity down to 6%. This is going to be for the heavier work in here, 6-7% for the heavier work in here. Once I get to lighter areas of skin, I can get down as much as only 1% opacity. These are incredibly low opacities because the work I'm trying to do is subtle. I'm then going to use my bracket keys to actually make my brush about the size of the head of that pimple right about there. Then working on this tonal retouching layer with my burning color. So to get to my burning color, hit the X key. That's my burning color. I keep one hand when I'm doing this work, one hand on the X key, left hand on the X key, right hand on my tablet, and I just go back and forth all day long, actually dodging and burning, dodging and burning, dodging and burning. But right now I'm going to start with burning this in. So here's the trick and why you have to do this on a tablet. If you look at this image and you look at the skin, it's made up of discrete, almost, it's not really pixels, but it looks like little dots. There's nothing in here that's painted. You do not paint on skin. Even when we get to the lines under her eyes, we are not going to paint with that. What you do is, and I'm going to do it upside down so I don't fuck up my image, dot, 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 dot. You are always tapping. You are never clicking and drawing. You're just dot, 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 dot. That's how you actually do this. It'll emulate the texture of the skin better. Make sense? That's why you can't do this with the mouse. You're going to do this 150,000 times. Try doing that with a mouse. Your hand will cramp up. Try and do that with a trackpad. you're hitting there, tapping it with your finger, you will hate your life. So here it is. So watch this first, and then you guys can do it. So I'm hovering over the pimple part. I've got my left hand on the X key, and it's dot, 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 dot. Stop at this point, X key, and I need to make my X key a little bit larger for the surround. So dot, 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 dot. X key to actually hit just a little bit of that center, a little bit darker, dot, dot, dot. That may be too dark. We're going to find out. However, biggest problem that you've got right now is that you are looking at this. I'm looking at this at 400%. We are zoomed way the hell in there. You need an overview of what's going on. And to get that overview, you can't duplicate the image, because if we duplicate the image, we've got two separate images that are open. I'm retouching one and the other's just sitting there. But I can actually do another view of this image. And to do that, you come up to the window menu, down to arrange, down to new window for Skin Eyes Retouch. And this guy will open up, and now I've actually got another version of this that I can sit over here. I'm going to zoom into it a little bit, about like that. Now I can see that my retouching, I'm going to move this guy over so that you can see it. My retouching in that area is still a little bit darker. So again, it's this area right here. I'm going to go to a much larger brush. Hit the X key to get my dodging, and I'm just going to tap around there really quick. And I'm looking at that image. There's a little part that's up on the top side up in here that I need to actually just get rid of right there. And boom. Pimple's gone. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like now. No texture has been touched. That was done entirely tonally. I need you guys now to get rid of the pimple, tonally. Only tapping, no painting, no circling, no drawing with your stylist, only tapping. Is this beginning to work? Okay. Are we sort of good on this part? Even if you don't have it finished, don't worry. We need to look at some other things here first because we're running out of time and I need to get through the rest of this. I want everybody to take a look at what they've just done now. This is the reason that we actually put this, the reason you fill this with gray is so that you can spot your retouching. It doesn't have to be filled with gray, but the retouching then gets to be really hard to spot. If you hold on your Option key and just click on the eyeball, it'll turn everybody else off, and you can see this is what I've actually done. This is the retouching that I've done here. This is what actually got rid of it. The darker area made the center of the pimple darker. This area that's around it made the surround area a little bit lighter. I can also spot a little bit of area here on the top where I may have missed something, so this would actually help me go in and fix it. However, let's say you took this too far. You went too far with this. You can actually bring your retouching back by painting with middle gray. Or you can simply fill this with middle gray. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit the L key to get a circle. I'm going to surround this. Let's just say it was horrible. What I did was horrible here. And simply come up to the Edit menu, down to Fill. And in the drop-down menu, pick 50% gray and say, okay. That has now brought the pimple back. So now if I take a look, it's all right back. That's what just happened. So it's a way to undo what you've actually done. You've also got a layer mask that you could add to this, and you could use the layer mask to pull things back as well. Does that make sense, what I'm talking about here? Are we good on this part? Okay. I'm going to get rid of one of these two frames. I'm actually going to go back and bring my retouching back because it's not bad. Anyway, I want everybody then to now come up right underneath her right eye, and you'll actually see some very, very, very fine lines that are under her right eye. We are going to fix those tonally as well. So again, I got a B key to get a brush. It needs to actually be really small now. And again, your temptation is going to be to paint this. Your temptation is going to be to stroke along this line. The problem with that is that you will never hit just that line perfectly. So the outside edges of that line will get lighter than the area where it's supposed to be. And so you will be able to lift the dark part of the line so that it is a normal skin color, but you will have highlights on both sides of that line. So this is still dot, dot, dot. So I'm going to start to work on this guy right here. White is my dodging color is the color that I've got up here. And I'm just going to start tapping all my way down. So this is, again, this is just tap, 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 tap. I'm going to continue to work down here on the line that's down here. And you might say to yourself right now, well, Verser, that's not doing a damn thing. Look at this. It's not doing anything. Turn your retouching layer on and off and tell me that's not doing anything. It pulled that line out perfectly. Did not disrupt the texture of the skin at all. Correct? Okay. Finally, I want to go to this area that's really sort of more in the center of her face. Again, it's that one cheek. It's got a lot of texture to it, a little bit of pebbly skin. I'm going to show you how I would retouch this, how I'm going to start doing this. So take a break really quickly with what you're doing. Make sure that you watch this part because there's 2 or 3 other things that I've got to show you. We're doing relatively well time-wise. I think we're going to be able to get all this in. So this is typically the way I start. I always start with lightning, so I'm going to deal with these areas that are right in here. And again, I've got a little bit larger brush. And again, I just start tapping wildly. Keep your brush moving. Don't stop in any one place. Even if you feel like you need to come back here, that's fine. Keep your brush moving. If you stay in one place too long, it will actually suck. It will become really apparent that that's what you're doing. So I'm running this brush around as much as I possibly can. Again, you can see I'm not really spending a lot of time in any one given area. If you want to see what this looks like, this is what I've laid down right now, all little discrete lines. Look at the line that I did up here. You can see this is not drawn. This is all series of little bitty dots that have actually gotten rid of that part. So in this part right here, I keep doing that, but then I get bored and I hit the X key to actually do my burning color, and I start doing the lighter areas in here to actually bring them in. Again, do not stay in one place too long. Do not feel like you're going to actually get it all in one shot. So this is the part that I'm actually doing in here. Hit the X key again to go back to my dodging color to open these up. X key again to do a little X key again to do a little burning color in here. And all of that. So you say, well, what has happened right here? This is what's happened. Look at this. That has completely removed the pebbling of that skin, but the texture is 100% intact. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? So that's how I do it. 2 things you need to know about here, though, that we need to look at really quickly. If you come up, and you can do this with me, if you look at, I'm up at the area that's right underneath her eye, and there's a series of eyelashes coming down right here, and there's this one little white dot right there. I'm going to actually try to burn this in. So I'm going to just make my brush, it's about the size. I'm going to just start clicking, and I'm going to just, I keep hammering on this guy. And I'm going to keep hammering on this guy, and I'm going to keep hammering on this guy. And it's not burning in at all, but look what has happened around the edges around this. The edges around this are now, obviously, it's now picture framed this thing. So I not only didn't get rid of the white spot, I've now actually made it worse because I've got a black surround that's around it. If you take a look at the pixel content, so again, I'm holding down the Option key and clicking on this, this is almost black, and it's wrong. What happens in images is there are areas that we are dodging and burning. If you've got an area that's white, or an area that's black, or an area that's close to white or close to black, you can't dodge it or burn it. There's nothing to do. I can't burn this in because there's nothing there to burn in. So to fix it, again, I'm going to hit the lasso key to get the lasso tool. I'm going to surround this. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray because it's a mistake. Command D to deselect, turn everybody else back on. At this stage of the game, I've got to go back to my pixel retouching, which is what I'm going to do. I am going to do the healing brush tool. It's the least of the obtrusive ones. However, because I'm working on my pixel layer, I actually have blending modes that will work. So all I need to do is make this dot darker. So I'm going to set the blending mode of this to darken. You'll notice that with the healing brush tools, you don't get the entire list of blending modes like you do if you do the clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool, you get them all. But the healing brush tool, you don't, but you get the ones that matter to us. So healing brush tool, and I'm going to set this to darken. And then you want to sample an area that will change it the absolute least. So what I'm looking for here is an area that's slightly lighter than this surround area. I don't want to pick an area that's darker or all of a sudden I'll have a dark spot in here. So I'm going to sample right below this. Check to make sure that my brush hardness is 50%. It is. It's set to darken. I'm going to hold down my Option key and I'm going to click right below it and come up here and just take care of that part. And the only thing that has been changed is that white. All of the painting around it that I didn't change because the blending mode kept it from adding any different pixel content to the area that's around this. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody on that one? So again, it's the minimal amount of damage that I can do to change this to get the effect that I want. There's a number of these dots that are around. So again, I'm going to sample down here and get this little dot. And again, there's a lot of this you can do tonally. And if you can do it tonally, you don't want to do it with this. Look at the catch lights on her eyes. So I'm going to actually kill the catch lights really quickly. I'm actually just going to go back to normal so you can see this. I'm going to hit this really hard and quick. All right, I need everybody to look at my image. I've removed the catch lights from this side of this part of her eye, right? Dead girl, alive girl. Dead girl, alive girl. If you remove the catch lights in her eyes, you remove the moisture in her eyes, and if you don't have any moisture in your eyes, you're dead. So if you want to create zombie pictures of people who are dead, you remove all the catch lights in her eyes. If you want them to still look alive, don't fuck with these things. Right? So again, in this case now, I've already screwed that up. If I had already saved this file and couldn't go back in history, I can always add a layer mask to this, hit the B key to get a brush. You'll notice that now, because I'm on a layer mask, my foreground and background colors have defaulted back to black and white. You cannot have color in a layer mask. If I go back to the pixel layer, you'll see that these go back to my foreground and background dodging and burning colors, but on a layer mask, they don't. And again, hit the X key to get black as my color, make this a little bit larger and bring back all the catch lights. I got to raise my opacity all the way back up again and bring back the catch lights. Now she's a live girl again. Make sense? Okay, so still working on this pixel layer here. There's not a lot in here that's really too dark that you're going to actually, all of the dark areas in here, you should be able to lift those using dodging and burning. But like this little dot up here, this dot here, this dot here, this dot over here, those are all too light. You'll never burn those down. This dot that's right above her eyelid right there. But the rest of this you can actually do. So, what do I expect from you? I will show you right now. Oh, we got one other thing to look at, but I want to show you this part really quick. And then we're done. I've given you references, I think, in here. When you look at your assignment folder, do you see a tonal retouch large reference and a tonal retouch small reference? You should. Okay, I'm going to open up the small reference just so that you can see what it looks like. This is an image that was actually well done. Look at this. It took her 8 hours to do this. There's also a large version of retouching. I'm going to show you her large reference right here. And then I'll show you actually what it looks like, the work she did. So you can see in this case, it's much bigger, broader areas. So this is what the tonal retouching large layer looks like. So in tonal retouching large, almost done, I swear. If you got to leave, leave. But we're almost done here. I'm going to make another copy. Not a copy. I'm going to make another retouching layer. Option key. Click on this. Call it tonal retouch large. Again, change this blending mode to soft light. Fill it with that color. And then what we need to do is look at larger areas of the image. So for those of you who have ever worn makeup, if you've ever worn foundation, the goal behind foundation is to basically take blotchy skin and make one tone out of it. And so you can see, what do I mean by blotchy skin? Well, look at this part right here. You can see on this little part of her cheek right here, this area is darker. Look at the area that's right underneath her eyes, considerably darker. Look at the area that's right here on the side, right in here, considerably darker in here as well. Look at the mustache line that she's got, considerably darker as well as the one that's under her lip. All of that, hit the B key. Again, this is where you drag your opacity down in that 2, 3, 4 range right here. I've still got my dodging and burning colors, so I'm going to hit my dodging color here really quickly. Make my brush a little bit larger, working on my tonal large layer, and just start tap, tap, tapping to actually lift this part. Start the same thing that's actually underneath her eye right here. I'm not going to have time to continue this completely, but you'll get a quick idea of what it looks like, and then I'm going to show you a final image of it. But you can now see, if I turn these on and off, that these areas are getting lighter and darker. Does that make sense to everybody? So once you do all the texture part, you go to a much bigger reference here and you do more skin smoothing all over. And finally, I'll show you what the result looks like. Actually, not the one I'm looking for. Son of a bitch. Oh well, I'll show you one anyway, just so you have some idea of what's going on. Look at this skin right here. This is all done tonally. This is what it looks like. Yeah. Look at this. This is the larger version of it. This is what he does actually to smooth stuff out. And this is what it looks like. Are we good? Yeah. I'll see you guys next week. Yes. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, yeah. Any other questions about any of this?
I have a question. Did you click the spot healing
No, healing brush tool, so I'm doing the sampling.
Oh, yeah, okay. This one, right?
Yeah, the second one down.
Yeah, I don't know why I said that one, but like, you clicked that one when you went back to it, and then,
Yeah, so again, to get those like super white spots, yeah, it's healing brush tool. Okay. Let me stop this video recording really quick, and then I'll answer any questions you guys have.